All right. Hello. Welcome to another episode of The High Ground, powered by Premier Companies. Jeff, how are we doing today?
I'm wonderful, Sal. How about you?
Outstanding.
What do you got for us?
Well, today we have our favorite technical agronomist, Mr. Glenn Longabaugh, one of our favorite and returning guests, regular guest.
He's our only technical agronomist.
He is.
Okay.
There's second to none at Premier Ag.
Well, I appreciate that. I think that's a pretty short list, right? There's not a lot of competitors in there, fortunately.
But
you're number one.
I appreciate that too.
Well, before we go much farther, what's the question of the day is, what's your funniest hunting mishap? And I knew for this group, we ought to be able to come up with something.
Yeah, well, I've only hunted for about 50, well, it's been longer than that. I probably killed my first squirrel at 5. So,
Yeah.
You know, we're talking 59 years of hunting experience and lots of mishaps. But the funniest single thing I've ever seen in the woods, I've had several, but the one that comes to mind, I've probably already told you about. I was sitting in a tree stand probably 10 years ago after they turned otters loose. And I was in Illinois, and this family of otters, there's like half a dozen otters, comes cross country, sounded like a herd of rhinoceroses coming at you or something through the leaves. And they played and ate fish and just went through the whole thing. But when they went to leave, they've had this little trail that went from this slough, this oxbow slough, over the spoil pile into the Skillet Fork River. And I watched the first one go up, and this otter gets in this little sandy spot, looks like a deer scrape, and starts dancing like, you know, like a football player doing that fast footwork, you know, where they do this number. And he's going squirt, squirt, squirt. And I told my boss about it at the time. He goes, "Oh, yeah, that's an otter toilet." And I had never heard of that. But otters have this thing where they go up in the middle of this little sandy spot, or this place they have marked off, and they dance kind of like, you remember John Belushi's character in Animal House when he goes on reconnaissance and, and he's doing this dancing around?
Oh, my gosh.
That's the way they do. Their back end is like hopping from foot to foot, and the whole time they're pooping in this this little block. And the next one comes up, does the exact same thing. The next one comes up, and they do this single file. I mean, it's like watching donkeys. You know, you can't watch it, you can't see it without putting a smile on your face. But an otter toilet is the funniest thing I've ever seen.
Never.
Let's just move on. I don't think anybody can top that one. So.
In fact, I probably have video of it somewhere on my phone.
That would be awesome.
Yeah. Video.
Jeff, do you have one?
Yeah, I've been trying to think of something, but I've had the probably the funniest one at my brother-in-law's expense. We were elk hunting in Montana, and we're on the side of a mountain in the middle of the afternoon. It's time to take a break, and we'd always stop and build a little fire and stuff, and everybody's tired, and you just kind of laid back on the side of this mountain, just taking a little snooze. And our fire, and I don't know how to, you would probably know what I'm talking about. We had this little Indian fire, they called them. It's a small fire. But the ground, almost like a tundra type ground, the fire started spreading underground.
Yeah.
But you don't see it on top.
Oh, my gosh.
Muskeg.
Yeah. So
It's
next
like
thing
peat.
you know,
It's peat,
my
basically.
brother-in-law jumps up and stuff, and he just bought a brand new pair of, they're on fire and melting.
No way.
Oh, yeah. I could see that.
So that's been 20 years ago. But here not too long ago, he found that old pair of hunting pants. He was going through some stuff.
Sure.
And he sent me a picture of them, and I was like, "Hey, that's that day you were just about well done."
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, so that's got to be one of the funnier ones.
That is.
Watch
That
him
would
jump
be
up,
one.
and he almost did an otter toilet dance.
Yeah.
Trying to put his pants out.
Gosh.
How about you, Sal?
Oh, mine, bunch of them, but probably one used to duck hunt quite a bit. Had a really good dog, Maggie, a chocolate lab, and she was a good hunting partner. And we were back there behind the farm. We got a small lake back there, and the beavers had a dam that was kind of or a muskrat pile, a big one. It was the old pond bank, but it was about an acre pond bank, and you had to we took a rowboat over there to see if I wanted to set up some decoys over in that area, and it was a day, high 30s, low 40s. It was cold, winter day, and I pulled up on the bank over there, and the dog jumped out with me, and I got out and just kind of stomped around a little bit to see where I'd put some decoys, and turned around, and Wind was coming right out of the west and just blew the boat back off the right. Mm-hmm. And it was the old pond bank, and so I knew there was no way to get out of there. And I was watching the boat, and it had the rope hanging down on the side, where just an old cord. And I looked at the dog, and I was like, she'd never pull that off, going to retrieve
the boat.
Yeah. And so it wasn't going to get any better, so I jumped in, and it was only about a 10-foot quick swim out to the rope to get it, and drug it back to the beaver dam and got back in the boat. And then I was like, oh my gosh, it was freezing. Rode as fast as I could back to the boat. Well, I just got a new company truck, and I was just soaked. I just jumped in, right? So I shucked off all the clothes, got in the truck, and then it was just chattering. Teeth was just chattering, couldn't get warmed up. Pulled into Mom and Dad's. That was the first place I could come to. Got out of the truck and ran back to the shed where the boiler was, the outside boiler. And then I finally got back in the house, and I could hear Dad yelling, "He's 20-something years old and running around butt naked. Can't teach him nothing."
Well, it's kind of that's worse than having a hole in your waders that you find out when you first get in the water.
Well, I guess not. Jerry Clower would say that wouldn't be buck naked because you can be naked with your shoes on. So it wasn't.
That doesn't constitute being buck naked.
No, not according to Jerry Clower.
There you go.
Glenn, you just knock him out, John.
Shoot up there amongst them.
Yes. Well, speaking of shooting and hunting, you just got back from a hunting trip. What did you learn out west?
I did. Well, I learned that not every deer behind the trees in Kansas are monsters, right? Oftentimes you see the Facebook posts and the outdoor television programs, and by the way, they do have some giants out there. But this year I went out and spent probably more time than I usually do in a stand. And I saw tons of deer and didn't see a single shooter, right? So
people lie on social media?
No, I think
they embellish.
You see the really lucky ones, right?
Yeah.
And
maybe your standards are just too high.
They have gotten higher, but if you talk to my bride, she'll tell you that there's getting to be very little wall space left, right? So you can't mount 150-inch deer anymore. You got to look for something just the next rung higher, because you may have to take something down to put a new one up, right?
It's like a Cabela's going in there.
But the way you posed that, I would say this: you asked what I learned out there. You can only sit in a stand. And as a farmer, right, if you get downtime like that, the first thing you do is you open Facebook Marketplace and you start shopping for equipment. I got to tell you, you can only do that for so long, especially when you have no money.
Because you keep increasing the radius out to 700 miles.
But this year, I tell you, I actually did learn something really significant in tree stand, and it might be applicable to our audience. For years we've talked about the penalty to growing corn behind cover crops, corn and soybeans behind cover crops, right? And it doesn't show up all the time. And we often say, hey, there's these phytotoxins that show up in corn, especially behind cereal grains like wheat and cereal, rye, barley, that sort of thing. And yet, I can't say that I could ever lay hands on exactly what are the phytotoxins, right? And so I had enough time, and between a little bit of time and AI, right, artificial intelligence, I actually found some really cool publications about what these toxins really are, and it was really interesting. It turns out that cereal rye especially produces a lot of these. They're called binoxidazinoids. And they abbreviate it BX, and it's things like diboa, boa, dimboa. These are compounds, or aromatic hydrocarbons that have a really deleterious effect on living plants, especially the roots. And so when you see this response, right, you've killed off cereal rye, for example, and the soybeans or corn kind of set still for a little while, right? Typically for a couple weeks. It's probably because of their exposure to these compounds. And these compounds are known, they're pretty well documented. What they screw up is root development. And so, there's more compounds in that. There's these phenolic acids that are typically we think of them as being positive when they're inside the plant. When the plant's producing these phenolic acids, it's typically as it's in response to disease, insects, that sort of thing. They're actually antioxidants, right? So they would be to combat free radicals. It's the reason why we eat blue fruits, right? Red and blue fruits produce a lot of these antioxidants, right? So they combat free radicals and premature aging. But in the case of corn behind cereal grain, it's producing these BX compounds, and it's probably inhibiting root growth. And so how a grower might apply that is we have lots of biologicals in the market today, right? Whether you're into regenerative ag or whether you're a conventional grower that just, wants to experiment with biologicals, the question is, when and where do these things work? Well, this might be the reason why we don't see things, even things that are hard chemistry like plant growth regulators. Why don't they show up every single time? Well, maybe it's because we don't have the environment for them to really shine. So in the case of something like Ascend2, which has a higher dose of auxin, which has a response in that it promotes more or additional rooting, especially when you combine it with a phosphorus fertilizer source. Maybe when we get into no-till, especially no-till buying cereal grains, we'll see an extra big response, right? That would be the first place. If you're gonna, if you're gonna use Ascend2, Ascend, starter fertilize, that's where you're most likely to see the largest single response. And in fact, even Ascend ST3 on soybeans, my thought is, making more robust corn almost always equates to what, Jeff? If we make bigger corn early, does it yield
Roots.
more or less?
Oh, if you make it big early, I mean,
Yeah, we make corn big early. Does it make it yield more or less?
It should make it yield more.
It makes it yield more almost every time, right? Corn is really consistent that way, but soybeans are not that way, right? We can make bigger, more robust beans early, and it doesn't always equate to more yield. And so the question is, do we put Ascend ST3 on every acre, on every bag, try to make every bean more robust? Well, probably, 90% of the time it's going to be, positive to neutral. But where would we most likely to see a response? Well, the place we might most likely see a response is behind cereal grains that are producing these BX compounds that tend to limit root growth, because we know that Ascend2 is one of those plant growth regulators that's higher in auxin and causes a proliferation of roots.
So if I've established a good cover crop, I just got some cover wheat out there.
Sure.
And I'm going to plant corn next spring. What steps can I do right now to start planting to prevent what you're talking about?
Boy, that's a great question. So we know that wheat is especially deleterious. Wheat and cereal rye are probably the two worst cereal grains to plant in front of corn. If you have them already planted, which we do a lot of, right, in this part of the world, and we do it because of erosion. It's not because of recycling nutrients, and it's not, there's not 25 things they do, but they do a pretty good job of controlling erosion.
Hold the ground.
They do a pretty good job of structuring the soil if you got on it too wet and packed it down. But the recipe is to try to avoid a big flush of these phenolic acids or these BX compounds, right? And how do you do that? You don't want the corn trying to establish in that first 2-week period after you've terminated the crop.
Well, that was going to be my next question. So do you need to, let's say it's wheat, kill the wheat, and then how long do you need before you try to establish that corn?
Yeah, that's perfect segue. It's about 2 weeks, right? So when you terminate a crop early, or when you terminate a cover crop, you're going to already have BX compounds being produced, right? So there's already some there. That's why you don't normally terminate and plant the crop, because that's the worst scenario. Because now you've got BX compounds that are in the soil solution that are actually inhibiting corn growth. And then over the course of the next 2 weeks, while the wheat and the rye are rotting, they're producing more of these phenolic acids that are also having a deleterious on the crop, effect on the crop. And that's why, there are these voodoo dates, and that's the worst, right? Is to terminate the cover crop and plant corn immediately.
So how does weather, so if it takes 2 weeks, let's say either 2 weeks in ideal weather, or now, we got one of those cold, wet springs. Hey, we got the wheat killed, it's been cold and wet. Do I
Yeah,
need
yeah,
to,
yeah. That's a good question. So here's what I would say. It's a combination of weather, which has an effect on both the rotting of the cereal grain, and it also has an effect on the vigor of the crop, right? So if it's wet, it slows the rotting, so you're going to have less of these phenolic acids produced, but you also have a crop that's struggling because it's not getting rapid GDD accumulation, right? So that would be the worst case scenario. Here'd be the prescription. If you want to be successful, if you got a really robust cereal grain cover crop, I would get out there in March and I'd terminate that thing as soon as you can possibly get over the ground. And if you make a few tracks, so be it. But that way the crop has a chance for the BX compounds to get out of the soil profile, for them to leach out, and you have time for it to start to rot and produce these phenolic acids that then have a chance to leach away before the crop is trying to establish. And so 2 weeks prior to, or wait until you've got the crop planted and the crop is more cellulosic, right? This is one of those things. It's like, how is it possible that some of these folks are going into really tall, big rank cereal rye or really big wheat? They plant corn in it and the stuff doesn't set still. It doesn't, it's not adversely affected by, well, as long as those BX compounds dissipated, the actual rotting is really slow, right? Once that wheat or rye the cereal grain gets so big, you can terminate it and it won't rot. It'll stand there because it has enough lignin, enough cellulose, enough hemicellulose, right? That it doesn't rot right away. So you're not giving it a double whammy of toxins, right? And so this is the stuff that I discovered. I know you're probably thinking, who studies this stuff sitting in a tree in Kansas?
Yeah.
But oftentimes you don't really, as an adult learner, you don't have the time, you don't have the focus most days to be able to really do a deep dive into that.
Sal's actually sitting over there taking notes, trying to figure out how to spell some of those words that you just spit out. So
I got that one, BX.
Yeah, BX.
Yes. So where does the Ascend, you had a product solution for something like
Yeah,
this?
so yeah, if I knew I was going to use, for example, all my hill ground, I have cover crop on yet. And so on all those hill fields, especially if I'm going to plant early or I'm going to plant right into a freshly terminated cereal grain, then I would certainly want to give them every opportunity to mitigate the negative effects of these BX compounds. And that would be something like Ascend ST3 on soybeans or Ascend squared in corn, right? And I tell you this not because we want to make this a paid infomercial. It's more around the curiosity we have around, why is it that sometimes we see a really big response and sometimes it's a very muted response, right? That's the thing that keeps me awake at night. How can I more accurately predict when we're likely to see a response? Well, here's when we're likely to see a response is when you have set the stage for maybe a negative effect from these phytotoxins, right?
Well, and the way we put weed in on our hillsides, I mean, a lot of times, the kid gets in the drill and just goes back and forth, and
Sure.
It looks like he's just randomly putting weed in out through the field and the waterways and hillsides, and so that complicates it even further because you've got it in some areas and
Sure.
and not in others.
Yeah, but on corn especially, there's not going to be ever it would be very rare to ever have any kind of deleterious effect from building a bigger plant early, right? That's what we get from PGRs like Ascend or Ascend squared is we build a more robust factory early on. There's a remote chance that you build a bigger factory and then you don't feed it, and that would potentially cause you to have a negative impact on yield. But most times if you build bigger plants early on, at least on corn, you end up with bigger yields. Right? You go far enough north, and that's pretty true on soybeans too, right? Because they become more sink limited they become more source limited as opposed to sink limited, right?
You and I learned if I'm a farmer and I've got a cereal grain cover crop out there, I'm just going to go hunting. Sometime in February, I'm going to call Glenn, say, Glenn, tell me, you've done the research. How do I do this?
That's right.
So I can just, if I'm a corn farmer, I'm just going to enjoy my hunt. Glenn's already done the homework.
There you go. That's exactly right.
That's what I learned right there.
We should do the podcast, later this week from the deer blind.
We could do that. I volunteer for that.
Only if,
So I
there,
bet.
only if there's otters close by. I want to see some otters too.
Shoot. Anywho. But no, I thought that was maybe something you weren't expecting. But
I was not expecting that.
yeah, but it was really
I
interesting.
wasn't expecting the otter thing either, but that, this is all worked out. So
Yeah.
What
Benzoxazinoids. You
BX?
Yeah, BX. Yeah. You know what? Something else is kind of interesting about that. I was kind of like, well, I've never heard of this class of chemistries, right? I know it's some kind of aromatic hydrocarbon, kind of like a phenolic acids. Turns out that there's diboa, there's araboa, there's boa, and then there's dimboa. Do you remember what dimboa is, Sal?
No.
He's a great student. Dimboa is a natural compound that corn produces at pretty high levels until it gets to about V6. And by the time it gets V6, dimboa becomes, the concentration comes down enough that insects then, like European corn borer, can now infect the plant. Corn plants are actually natively resistant to corn borer because of a compound called dimboa, one of these BX compounds. And so that's why plants produce them, right? Plants don't produce them just because they want to be a turd to their neighbors, right? That's not the point. It's really for other purposes, right? It's to control. It's to, they have antifungal properties. They have antibiotic properties, right? This is kind of the, what would you call it? If it was in people, it would be your immune system, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of the immune system for plants.
Very good.
Yeah.
So is there? Can you reproduce these things as a biological that you can apply to a crop?
Well,
in dimboa?
Yeah. That's a good question. It seems like we probably have some chemistry. I don't know what class that would be in.
You got to go deer hunting. again.
Yes.
Get
Well,
the deer
now,
out.
yeah, I'll have to check and see. There is a classification for insecticides. It's called IRAC. It's the Insect Resistance Action Committee, and they have they've categorized.
So not the country.
No. It's like FRAC. There's IRAC, which is Insecticide Resistance Action Committee, and they have. They've put numbers and letters on all the different modes of action on insecticides. Insecticides are a little different than herbicides. There's a lot more, when you think about herbicide modes of action, they're really unique. When you think about insect modes of action, there's a whole passel of them, but in reality, they almost all work on the nervous system, right? There's, things like either it's the sodium channel or the chlorine channel. They're screwing up the plant's ability to mute these chemical responses when they have neurons fire. That's the majority of what insecticides do, right? Whether we're talking about carbamates, almost all of them. In fact, the only exception I can think of is something like the insecticidal proteins that you get from BT,
BTs.
like Bacillus thuringiensis, and they work really uniquely because what they do is they just react with some of the compounds in insects' gut and forms these crystals that then constipate them. It comes around to poop in almost every conversation.
Oh my God.
Okay, in
little-
soybeans, okay, or not soybeans. In insects, we don't call it poop. We call it frass, right? And what it does is it stops them up, and they basically become
They
constipated.
can't do the otter dance.
That's right. They can't do the otter dance, and next thing you know, and it sometimes perforates their midgut also, so they end up perishing from that.
I can't think of where else to go from here.
Yeah, our podcast has gone to where.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just gone to poop today, hasn't it?
How about manure management? Got anything on that?
While I was out there last week, I did get a really nice report from one of my peers up north, a technical agronomist with Keystone. Some of our listeners know Jason Roth, and Jason did send me a really nice report from one of the labs on different manures, and I was what he was really wanting was what he didn't understand was what's the difference between a pullet and a broiler and a brooding manure is not the same as laying manure, not the same as
Finishing, yeah.
and so they all are different. So yeah, we had a nice conversation around that. So we really do have conversations about poop.
Well, with fertilizer prices, there's been a lot more manure applied.
Absolutely. There's
So,
been a lot of interest. I wish I still had a source for manure because phosphates are what's high, right? I mean, we did a really good job, I think, this year between the folks at Lagodi that helped consult me. I think we did a pretty good job of getting our cover crop on and getting K addressed. We cut back the P just because P is so unbelievably high, and we don't get in the habit of that. But probably 1 year it's not going to kill us, right? And we didn't go to zero. That's the thing I would really always caution growers is to try to go from zero. Going from big rates to zero. It's probably not going to kill you for 1 year, but it could, right? It could hurt your yield. Because the phosphate that we remove, and by the way, phosphorus is different than potassium. We take up lots of potassium, but we remove very little. We take up lots of phosphorus. We take up less phosphorus.
But we haul it all off.
But we haul it all off, right? It has the highest harvest indices. So it's like of what a plant takes up, you remove like 80%.
In corn and beans.
Yeah, in corn and beans. Absolutely. And so, and just remember that when you cart that off, that's not the hard to get to phosphorus, right? That's the most accessible phosphorus. That's the stuff that's most easily accessed is the stuff that you cart away. And so if you don't put any back, right? I'm not saying that you're going to have a total crop disaster in the first year, but man, you don't ever want phosphorus to be short. That'll show up quicker on yields than just about anything else.
Along those lines, you might mention to beware some of those products that
yeah, that's a good
that claim to enhance phosphorus availability.
Yeah, and so there's some that probably have a foundation in science, but the vast majority of the claims made around phosphorus availability, right? The vast majority of those either they may work, but they work with such a low frequency that you cannot rely on that. But even if they do, right? Even if you took a biological that had mycorrhizal fungi and it made the environment more acidic, and you did happen to release a little more phosphorus to the crop, you know what you've done? You've just mined that much deeper. If you're taking it off and you're not putting it back on, I got news for you. You can't accrue for that with
math.
Science. You might do it through voodoo, but you're not going to do it through science, right? The science is pretty clear, right? And does that mean that there's not a bunch of phosphorus there? No, phosphorus is in a huge pool in the soil, but there's such a very, very small amount that is ever in the soil solution in the right form for plants to take up, right? And so when we put on orthophosphates, right? The orthophosphates are those ortho meaning proper, those phosphates that are very reactive with things like calcium and magnesium and zinc. Those are the type of phosphates that are in MAP and DAP and even triple superphosphate. Right? When we put those on, they over the course of the season might be available to the crop, but at any given time, there's only a very small portion of those that are available. Right? You need to have the right pH, and again, they behave. We think of phosphate as being an anion, but it doesn't behave in the soil as an anion. Because the form that's taken up by plants is HPO4 or H2PO4, right? It's phosphoric acid, and so you put it in an environment with a lot of calcium, you put it in an environment with a lot of magnesium, you put it in an environment with a lot of zinc. Right, you will tie it up. You will complex it with calcium, or you will bind it with things like zinc, and it will be a long time before it's ever available again. So yeah, the more you know, then the more you probably recognize that it's a huge buffer. There's a certain amount of forgiveness in there, but if you get out of the habit of putting phosphorus on, it will bite you sooner than you think. Because there's a really high harvest indices.
And not a quick fix.
And there's no magical juice, right? Within regenerative and sustainable agriculture, the only thing they can rely on that will consistently keep up when it comes to phosphorus is using animal waste. And animal waste is great stuff, right? We all like to use animal waste, but you can overdo that also, right? There are places, when we were up at Michigan State a couple weeks ago, getting some training, we visited with their, soil and fertility extension specialists, and Kurt kind of divulged that they have places where they've been using animal waste under the guise that they're being more sustainable or being more regenerative, and they actually have cadmium levels so high now that they can't even sell some of the produce that comes off of it.
Oh my gosh.
And so, I think the average listener, I hear on TV all the time them using those kinds of buzzwords: organic, sustainable, regenerative. And they say that as though it is inherently safer, and nothing could be further than the truth, right? And so in modern agriculture,
Nothing like a good dose of heavy metals in your fruit and vegetables.
there you go. And by the way, using manure one time, even a lot of municipal waste is tested for heavy metals, and a single dose is probably not going to be a problem. Where it becomes a problem is where you're next to the confinement facility, or you are next to the, you're one producer that gets all the municipal waste from one, from one community, and you put it on time after time after time. Well, that sounds great initially, but those really small concentrations of metals that don't go away, right, that plants don't necessarily remove very much of, can bite you over time.
It's funny, the marketing buzzwords and things that you called out. It's funny. I just thought of this 2 nights ago. I was looking. I was going to set some traps for groundhogs. Some kind of moved in out there, and we're in one of the bins. And I was just trying to look what kind of good bait, for a groundhog live animal trap. And it said organic carrots. Organic, right?
Yeah.
For a groundhog trap. And I'm like, how is that? Why would you put that there?
Yeah. When almost all carrots are.
Certainly, yeah.
Yeah. It's like when they use non-GMO in front of everything.
Everything.
Yeah, most of those crops have never been genetically modified. I mean, they've been selected, but they're not genetically modified. And by the way, that's the other one that just drives me absolutely crazy. And you see that even at the national level, right? We have a Secretary of Health and Human Services that believes that genetically modified organisms are inherently bad. Well, there's a lot of things that he probably is casting doubt on that probably needs to be investigated, but I can't think of anything that has a better track record than genetically modified corn in this country, genetically modified corn and soybeans. Not only has there never been a documented case of real allergenic response to these types of products, if you look at what it's done for the environment, it has been unbelievable, right? There would not be a no-till, minimum tillage. You would not have any of that if it was not for genetically modified. And let's just call a spade. Roundup Ready. If we didn't have Roundup Ready crops, then conservation tillage, no-till could have never taken off. Right, it could never have been successful without that type of technology.
Look at BT, all the semi-loads of insecticides that we used to sell.
Yeah,
just the total pounds of pesticides.
Oh my God!
Been taken out of the market.
Yeah, and you know what's funny is when I talk to younger students in my generation, we talked about Dimboa. Everybody knew what Dimboa was. That's when it wanes. That's when you have to start scouting for European corn borer. Today, you talk to young people, they don't know what Dimboa is, and they just got a master's degree in agronomy. Well, why? Because in the last 20 years, because of BT corn, we hardly ever see European corn borer. So it's not a significant pest. If you're not doing hand-to-hand combat with European corn borer, you probably don't need to know what Dimboa is, right?
That's a good stopping point.
Wouldn't hand-to-hand combat be more army worms than?
Oh my God!
You're not just pretty hair. Yeah, you know that.
Oh my!
I'm a thinker. Well, you've lost control of this one.
I've lost control, and if you all haven't guessed, that's another episode of The High Ground. Glenn, thank you very much for joining us again. And Jeff, is there anything else we haven't covered? We got otters and hand-to-hand combat.
Yeah, we probably ought to just end it right there.
Let's just cut this one off. All right. That's another episode of High Ground. Thank you all very much.